Fellas, I'm going to be able to talk about the most overlooked fighter in every weight class in the UFC. Now, I don't mean underrated, because underrated means, no, they're not getting their credit. Overlooked, I'm saying they still get their credit, they still get recognition, but people are just completely overlooking them. They see them as just another contender, see them as someone that's not going to make it in the UFC or not going to do anything significant. So I'm going to be going through every single weight class and picking out one fighter that is, in my opinion, the most overlooked fighter in that weight class that needs more attention and at least some more respect for what they've done in the UFC. So we'll go straight in there with the heavyweight division. For the heavyweight division, you're not going to like this, but I'm going to go with Gelton Almeida. I'm going to go as far to say, I think in the heavyweight division, the biggest threat to Tom Aspinall, apart from John Jones and maybe, obviously, Curtis Blades, who he's just beaten, is Gelton Almeida. I mean, he's not Cyril Gane. Aspinall would take him down within seconds. Gelton Almeida is probably the most dominant wrestler as of right now, or at least in the current stage, of the heavyweight division. Look at what he's done to everyone. He's finished every single fight that he's won, apart from the Derek Lewis fight, which is what everyone hates him for. He's a great submission artist. He can latch up submissions from everywhere. He's got some of the most dominant wrestling, and he's out wrestling wrestlers. He just dominated Alexander Romanov, who was already a good wrestler, and Curtis Blades. In that fight with Curtis Blades is hyped up as this big wrestler in the heavyweight division. Gelton Almeida was out wrestling him in that first round pretty comfortably. I don't know how many takedowns he landed, but he landed a lot, and then obviously got finished in the second. The Derek Lewis fight out-grappled Derek Lewis, and you can't blame him for not wanting to stand on the feet with Derek bloody Lewis. Finished Rosenstrike as well. Before that, just submissions everywhere and TKOs. Gelton Almeida, I think he's a really big threat. He doesn't waste time on the feet like Curtis Blades, and don't get me wrong, of course I would favour Aspinall to beat Gelton Almeida. I'm not saying he beats him, but the fact that he did that to Curtis Blades and just recently did that to Romanov, I think he's one of the best wrestlers, if not the best wrestler right now in the heavyweight division. He doesn't waste time. He initiates a clinch immediately, and most of the time it works. I think he's got some sort of record for control time in the UFC of right now. I don't know the exact record, but it's something to do with control time. I think people are completely overlooking him after that Curtis Blades loss. I think he's one of the top heavyweights in the world right now. I think he has real good potential. I understand his stand-up isn't there, and he might be quite boring to watch. I'm not trying to say that he's entertaining to watch or anything like that, and I understand if you hate him because he's not fun to watch, but I think as far as potential goes, Gelton Almeida has a lot of it. So for the heavyweight division, I'm going to go with Gelton Almeida for not underrated, but overlooked in the heavyweight division. Then the light heavyweight division, I'm going to go with Khalil Rountree. I think Khalil Rountree is probably the most overlooked light heavyweight right now. This dude has been on a streak. I think, yeah, he's finished 4 of his last 5 fights. A lot of good wins under there as well. Dustin Jacoby, Anthony Smith in his recent fight, and he's a very, very good boxer. His striking has improved a lot. I understand he had quite a shaky start to his UFC career, but he seemed to have picked that up a lot. His boxing's really good. He's got a lot of power. I will say he's quite a bit stiff. I don't think he's ever going to become a champion or anything like that, but I think he's more dangerous than a lot of the contenders right now. Like, people are hyping up Jan Blachowicz, who's old and hasn't had a good win since his fight with Adesanya. People are hyping up a lot of these guys, Rakic as well, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're bad fighters, but Khalil Rountree needs more respect. I would have picked him to beat Jamal Hill had they fought at UFC 303, obviously partially because Hill had just been KO'd by Pereira, but I think Khalil Rountree's got a lot of potential. I think he's going to eventually climb that way into the top 5, and I think he's a really good light heavyweight that just doesn't get the respect he deserves. He KO'd Anthony Smith like it was nothing. I know Anthony Smith's not one of the best, but I'm going to go with Khalil Rountree for the light heavyweight division. I don't think he's one of the best strikers necessarily, but he's one of the most dangerous in this division, and I don't think people are giving the respect he deserves for it. The middleweight division, this is someone who's getting criminally overlooked, and it is Brendan Allen. People, ever since Brendan Allen got announced to be fighting Imavov, I've heard a lot of, oh, Brendan Allen's going to get finished this fight. This is the end of Brendan Allen. He's just a cat in the middleweight division. Who was it that said, like, someone said that Brendan Allen is like Jack Hermanson Part 2. Brendan Allen is criminally overlooked. This dude is arguably the best, or at least one of the best grapplers in the middleweight division right now. He is on, I think it's an 8-fight or 7-fight winning streak. All of them coming, or not all of them coming, but most of them coming by rear naked choke. He has one of the best rear naked chokes in the UFC. He almost finds it in every single fight, and he's out grappling grapplers. He out grappled the jiu-jitsu specialist Andre Muniz. He dominated Paul Craig with grappling. And I know people are looking at that recent fight with Chris Curtis and saying, oh, he went life and death with Chris Curtis. It was a close competitive fight, I'll give you that. But when you really think about it, Chris Curtis is a nightmare matchup for Brendan Allen. Like, he's an absolute nightmare matchup. A guy with really good takedown defense who's got sharp and powerful boxing. That's a nightmare matchup for Brendan Allen. And he beat Chris Curtis as well. I think Brendan Allen's completely been overlooked. He's got a fight coming up with Imavov, and I might actually pick him to beat Imavov as well. I know he got whooped by Strickland a couple years ago, but I think he's been an absolute streak recently. He seems to be much better than he was before, and he just looks way more well-rounded than he was before, and he's on an absolute streak. He's got really good grappling. So for the middleweight division, I don't think Brendan Allen's getting the respect he deserves just because he had, a close fight with Chris Curtis. He's been dominating people. I think he's got the most rear naked chokes right now in the UFC active, so I'm going to go with Brendan Allen for the middleweight division, 24-5 on a massive streak, a lot of momentum to his name, but for some reason no one's acknowledging that momentum. And then the welterweight division, this might surprise you, but I'm going to go with Jack Della Maddalena. I think he is completely overlooked. Now, not in the sense that people don't know he's one of the best. I think a lot of people know that JDM's the best, and rightfully so, but I think Shavkat's getting all the attention over JDM. I think people are, and listen, this isn't me trying to discredit Shavkat, but I think people are looking at the fact that Shavkat has got this resume of 100% finishes and, he's undefeated, finished every single fight that he's won, and people are only looking at Shavkat because of that rather than his actual performances. Whereas with JDM, you need to look at his performances. He outboxed Kevin Holland for 5 rounds straight, and that was a short notice fight. He KO'd Gilbert Burns in that fight. Gilbert Burns was one of the best welterweights in the world at the time. JDM KO'd him. And he showed in that fight with Gilbert Burns that he's got good judo and good grappling. He tripped Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns, one of the most decorated submission artists in the UFC, was on his back. And JDM was playing up to the camera as well. This dude has got the best boxing in the welterweight division. He's the best striker, or at least one of the best strikers in the welterweight division. And his grappling is severely underrated as well. I'm going to go JDM. I think he's stylistically nightmare for Belal Muhammad, and people are just saying, oh yeah, JDM will get finished by Belal Muhammad and then it'll be Belal versus Shavkat. Shavkat's good, he really is, and he's shown that in all of his fights, but I think as far as performances goes and as far as talent goes, JDM is probably number one in the UFC, or not in the welterweight division for me right now. I think he's super talented, I think he's super dangerous, and people are just looking at him as a contender that's not going to make it, whereas all the attention is going to Shavkat. We need to start giving JDM more attention, man. He's one of the best in the welterweight division right now, and I think he's super dangerous for everyone. And then the lightweight division, I'm going Paddy Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett is getting completely overlooked, and maybe since his win over Bobby Green, or King Green now, whatever he wants to call himself, he's not been overlooked as much, but definitely before this fight with King Green, I remember people saying Paddy Pimblett's never going to make it into the rankings, Paddy Pimblett's never going to make it far, Paddy Pimblett's just a big name who happened to make it to the UFC. I think Paddy Pimblett's got top 10 potential, and I think I would favour him to beat Renato Moicano. I might, maybe not Beneil Dariush, I think it's too early to say that Paddy Pimblett beats Beneil Dariush, but I think he beats Renato Moicano. I think Pimblett has real good potential in the lightweight division, the most stacked division in the UFC. I'd favour him to beat maybe a Jalen Turner as well. I know there's not much lightweights that I'd favour him to beat, but I think he could make it into the top 10. I think he's got really powerful striking. He seems to have improved a lot. He's much more calm in the octagon than he was before. His stand-up seems to be much more improved. His wrestling seems to be amazing, as we saw in that fight with Tony Ferguson. And he's got some of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in that lightweight division. The first guy to submit Bobby Green in the UFC. Green hadn't been submitted since 2009, January 2009. Paddy Pimblett was the first to do that, and he did it so flawlessly. He just beat his biggest test like it was nothing. That was his easiest fight in the UFC. I think Pimblett would beat Moicano. I'm going to say I think he'd beat Renato Moicano. I think there's quite a few ranked fighters that Paddy Pimblett will beat. And I remember there was a time when people said, oh, Paddy Pimblett won't even come close to making the rankings. He's just a big name who happened to make it to the UFC. Logan Paul will beat this dude in MMA. Yeah, Paddy Pimblett, I'm going for the lightweight division. I think he's been completely overlooked. He's never going to be champion. He's never going to beat Islam or anything like that, but I think he makes it into the top 10, and I think he has real good potential to stay in the top 10. This dude is improving rapidly in the UFC. Featherweight division, I'm going to go with Lerone Murphy. I think Lerone Murphy's the dark horse of the featherweight division. Now, it was between him and Joanderson Brito, but I mentioned Joanderson Brito in nearly every single video, so I'm going to switch it up a bit. I'm going to go with Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy, even at UFC Manchester, this dude was on Crowdcam, a ranked Manchester fighter at UFC 304, and no one even made a noise in the crowd. This dude is pretty much, most people would call him a nobody in the featherweight division. No one's really acknowledging Lerone Murphy. He's undefeated. I think he's 14-0, and he's come off some really good wins. He's fought a lot of tough people in the UFC, a lot of stylistic nightmares, and that recent Fight Night main event has kind of gone under the radar, where he just completely dismantled Edson Barboza. And what impresses me about Lerone Murphy is how well-rounded he is. He's got really, really good wrestling. He's one of the few Brits that can actually wrestle. He's got really offensive wrestling that has worked throughout his UFC career, and his stand-up has improved a lot. His confidence on the feet. He fought one of the most decorated kickboxers, or maybe he's a bit washed now, but at least at the time, one of the most decorated kickboxers in the featherweight division in Edson Barboza, and he was piecing him up on the feet. Lerone Murphy's a big problem. I think he's got top 5 potential in the featherweight division. He doesn't seem to make mistakes a lot. He's a very good grappler. He's a very good striker. He's really good at mixing them up together, and he's got really good fight IQ as well as Lerone Murphy, and nobody's talking about him. I think he deserves a little bit more respect. So for the featherweight division, even though he's not this big name and he's not this brash personality, I'm going to go with Lerone Murphy for the featherweight division. The bantamweight division, I was originally going to go with Kyler Phillips, but I think I'm going to go with Mario Bautista. Again, one of these names that is really talented that no one's really given the credit. He's one of the best submission artists right now in the bantamweight division. I'm going to go out there and say it. He's a really good submission artist. He lost in his UFC debut to Corey Sandhagen, who's one of the best bantamweights in the world right now. I think Mario Bautista deserves more credit than he's getting. He's 14-2 as an MMA record. He's on a massive streak, 3 of them coming by way of finish, and he's beating some pretty good people as well. Damon Blackisher, Ricky Simon. That was Ricky Simon as well. Ricky Simon, one of the best jiu-jitsu dudes, or maybe not one of the best jiu-jitsu dudes, but a really good grappler in the bantamweight division. And Mario Bautista beat him as well. And it's not only the fact that he's a really good grappler, his stand-up seems to have improved a lot as well. He seems to be a lot more confident on the feet. I think he's got a lot of power on the feet as well. He's very good boxing as well, does Mario Bautista, and if he can keep this up, I think he's got a lot of potential in the bantamweight division. I think he can definitely make the top 10. He can rack up wins. He's on a 6-fight losing streak, winning streak, sorry, and I think he's got a lot of potential. So for Mario Bautista, I'm going to say he's been overlooked in the bantamweight division. Nobody's talking about him, and I think he's better. I honestly would probably favour Mario Bautista to beat Marlon Vera. I think he'd take him down and control him. So I'm going to go Mario Bautista for the bantamweight division. Then the flyweight division, I'm going to go with the champion, Pantoja. That's right, I'm going with the champion right now, Pantoja, as the most overlooked flyweight, which is crazy because he's the champion, but I think he's getting way too much disrespect. People are acting like Pantoja's Dricus du Plessis. People are acting like Pantoja has won the belt off of fluke, and every single title fight has been a robbery. He has had some close title fights. The fight with Moreno was close, the fight with Steve Erceg was close, but close doesn't mean he lost necessarily. I think he won all of those fights, and look at the resume. Out of every single champion in the UFC right now, Pantoja has the best resume, not the best resume, but he has done the more clearing out than everyone else. He has cleared out his division. He beat Brandon Royval twice. He beat Brandon Moreno 3 times. He's beaten Alex Perez. He's beaten Manel Cap. He's beaten Matt Schnell. He's beaten all these dudes. He has basically cleared out his division. He's beaten so many of the flyweights. Maybe they haven't all been title fights. Steve Erceg as well, one that I didn't mention. Maybe they haven't all been title fights, but he has literally cleared out most of the flyweight division. And people keep talking about how it's close and how he can't be doing this every title fight. Well, how come no flyweight can beat him? Steve Erceg couldn't do it, and I'm not trying to discredit Steve Erceg or anything like that. Moreno couldn't do it. Royval couldn't do it. Manel Cap couldn't do it. He's fought grapplers that couldn't do it. The only dudes that have been able to beat Pantoja in the UFC have been Askarov and Figueiredo. Figueiredo's one of the best, greatest flyweights of all time. So I think Pantoja's getting too much hate. I feel like when it comes to Pantoja, everyone's like, oh, who's going to beat Pantoja? This dude would fucking whoop Pantoja. We need to give him more credit. He's got some defenses on his name. He's cleared out the flyweight division. He got the belt. He's tough. He's not even that boring. He's actually quite a fun dude as well because he's in a scrap in most of his fights. So for the flyweight division, I'm going to go with Pantoja, but that is my list of who I think the most overlooked fighter is in every UFC weight class. Let me know your thoughts on this list. If you agree, disagree, thank you for watching.